This journey begins on Lake Superior, 183 meters above the Atlantic Ocean. From this cold inland sea, water can travel more than 3,000 kilometers before it finally reaches saltwater. Superior is the highest of the Great Lakes. Its outlet is at the eastern end, where the lake narrows into the St. Mary's River and flows towards Sault Ste. Marie.
Here, the water drops about 7 meters toward Lake Huron. Rapids once blocked large ships. Today, the Soo locks carry them around the drop, while hydroelectric stations use part of the falling water.
Below the locks, the route opens into Lake Huron. Lake Michigan joins it through the Straits of Mackinac. They have different names, but the same water level, so hydrologically, they are one lake. The water leaves Huron through the St. Clair River, spreads into shallow Lake St. Clair, then passes Detroit and Windsor through the Detroit River. The current is immense, but the change in height is small.
That brings the journey into Lake Erie, still about 173 meters above the Atlantic. At Erie's eastern end, the landscape finally falls away.
The Niagara River carries Lake Erie toward Lake Ontario. Across the falls and rapids, the water loses almost 100 meters. This is the largest natural step in the entire route.
Canada and the United States generate nearly 5,000 megawatts around Niagara, but a treaty also protects minimum flows over the falls during tourist hours. The waterfall is both a natural spectacle and a carefully managed river.
Ships cannot survive that drop. They leave the Niagara River and enter the Welland Canal. 8 locks lower a vessel almost 100 meters, allowing it to pass between Lakes Erie and Ontario. Lake Ontario lies about 74 meters above the Atlantic. The upper Great Lakes are now behind us. At the lake's eastern outlet, beside Kingston and Cape Vincent, the St. Lawrence River itself begins. The new river threads through the Thousand Islands. Forested islands, narrow channels, homes, lighthouses, and a border share the same moving water. Ocean-going ships follow a marked deep-water channel through the maze.
Downstream, the current approaches the old international rapids. The Iroquois, Eisenhower, and Snell locks begin lowering ships through the controlled section of the river. Near Cornwall and the Seine, the Moses Saunders Dam spans the international river. Power stations on both sides produce nearly 2,000 megawatts, while locks and channels preserve the shipping route.
This landscape was not empty. In 1958, the new power pool flooded about 20,000 acres. Roughly 6,500 people were relocated. Some houses were moved intact. Roads, farms, and villages disappeared beneath the new shoreline. At Akwesasne, the river was already homeland, food source, and travel route. Dams, shipping works, and industrial pollution changed currents, habitat, access, and health. The same project that opened a continental highway also imposed lasting local costs.
Farther east, ships enter the Beauharnois Canal. 2 more locks carry them downward beside another major hydroelectric station. The river is now approaching Montreal and sea level.
At Montreal, the Ottawa River joins the system from the northwest. The St. Lawrence becomes a broad urban waterway lined with ports, bridges, islands, and the Lachine Rapids.
The Côte Sainte Catherine and St. Lambert locks bypass those rapids. Once a ship leaves the final lock below Montreal, the engineered staircase is over. From here to the ocean, there are no more seaway locks.
The river continues northeast and widens into Lake St. Pierre, a shallow expansion of the St. Lawrence. A maintained shipping channel crosses wetlands, islands, and some of the richest freshwater habitat along the route. Near Trois-Rivières, tides begin to influence the current. The water is still fresh, but the Atlantic is now pulling and releasing the river twice each day. At Quebec City, the river narrows between high banks. The tidal range becomes impossible to ignore. Ships that crossed inland lakes now move past an old port whose history was shaped by this entrance into the continent.
East of Ile d'Orléans, the upper estuary begins. The channel widens, salt reaches farther upstream along the bottom, and freshwater, tides, and ocean water begin to mix.
At Tadoussac, the deep Saguenay Fjord joins the St. Lawrence. Cold, nutrient-rich water rises and mixes here, supporting belugas and visiting whales. The river now behaves increasingly like a marine coast. Past Tadoussac, the lower estuary stretches between the North Shore and the Gaspé Peninsula. Towns face one another across water that grows wider, colder, saltier, and rougher. At Rimouski, the St. Lawrence can be 30 to 50 kilometers wide. The opposite shore may disappear below the horizon. Freighters still follow the channel, but from the beach, this no longer feels like an inland river.
Beyond Pointe des Monts, the estuary opens into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Anticosti Island divides the Great Basin, and water moves toward the Atlantic through Cabot Strait and the Strait of Belle Isle.
At Cabot Strait, the journey reaches the open Atlantic. The water has descended from Lake Superior, crossed 5 Great Lakes, past rivers, canals, falls, dams, cities, and an estuary, and finally become part of the ocean. This is the St. Lawrence system. Not one unchanging river, but one continuous route from the heart of a continent to the sea.